it? Okay. All right. Hey, good
Audience.
evening. Yeah, we have about 30 odd people in the audience
Yeah,
already.
so we can start.
Just
Yeah,
give it another minute. People are still coming in.
yeah.
We'll start in just formally in just a minute, folks. We're just giving it another minute for everyone to come in since the numbers are still going up. All right. Hey, so good evening, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever time of the day it is where you are. Uh, Thank you for joining us for another session of Poetry with Prakriti. Uh, Poetry with Prakriti comes to you from the Prakriti Foundation, which is an arts and culture NGO based in Chennai in South India, in the state of Tamil Nadu. And uh, the foundation has, for a couple of decades now, been doing all sorts of arts and culture events in Chennai. It has become a forum for creative people and their audiences. Creative people, could mean poets, artists, dancers, theater people, academics who study and who interact with the arts. All of these and their audiences can come together and participate as a community in the arts. The festival, Prakriti Foundation has a number of festivals which usually happen through the year in different parts of Chennai, and a few that in collaboration in other parts of the country as well. Uh, Poetry with Prakriti traditionally happens in Chennai in December at around the time of the Madras Music Month, the Chennai Classical Music Festival, where people come in from all over the world and you hear the best classical music in the world happening out there. And it was, in a sense, a way of telling the people who were coming in that music was lovely, but not the only thing about Chennai, that there was also poetry. And the festival, the Poetry Festival, takes poetry out into different venues. You'll have the traditional things like art galleries and bookstores and small auditoriums and things like that, but also in, say, a software park or in a metro train or all sorts of things at a shopping center and things like that. The idea being, again, to take poetry out and to let people hear and listen and view poets and interact with them in all kinds of circumstances. But of course, all our lives changed in 2020. Uh, Very early in the year, before the time of the festival, the Prakriti Foundation decided that it was not going to be safe to hold the festival in its traditional way in Chennai, and decided to do an online festival. So what happens is that for the first 3 Saturdays of every month, you have a different poet, each time a different poet, who reads their work and then engages with the moderator and with the audience in questions and chat about poetry. Uh, and this has been happening since the last week of October. It will continue on through this year uh, because it seems unlikely that it will be very soon before we can have public gatherings, before we can travel safely. And the advantage, of course, with a online interaction is that Poetry with Prakriti is no longer just restricted to those lucky people in Chennai who get to see it. It can go all over the world. Uh, and budget-wise as well, it does become a little easier. You do have to pay for a Zoom account, but then at the same time, you're not paying a lot of travel fees and things like that to get people in. So in balance, It's lovely. We've been enjoying this for the last few months. We've had some of the best poets in India and poets from abroad who have appeared in the festival, coming here and having long readings, chatting with people, interacting with them, and it's been lovely. So that's enough about introduction. Uh, we have with us today as associate presenters the SDNB Vaishnav College for Women, Chennai College, and they have brought in their students as well. So we're looking forward to a lively discussion from them. So may I please invite the principal, Dr. Geeta, to chat with us for a minute or two, if you can, ma'am, if you can turn on your video and your audio.
Thank you, sir, for giving us an opportunity to be with you. And our college, Srimati Devkunvar Nanalal Bhatt Vaishnav College for Women, is a women's institution. It's an autonomous institution affiliated to University of Madras, and it is also re-accredited by NAC with a A+ grade. So we have 6,500 women students, and we offer a wide range of courses in mathematical sciences, arts, humanities, new age sciences. And in fact, we are having 23 undergraduate, 13 postgraduate, and 5 MPhil programs, along with 6 disciplines who have the research. And English department has recently upgraded themselves to an English department. And I think this is also a very nice forum in which the faculty can take English research in poems also the next level. And we have mostly first generation learners in our college, and the college does everything to give a holistic education, and we see to it that they are all well placed once they leave our premises. And our college is very proud to be collaborating with the Prakriti Foundation each year. The services rendered by this foundation, be it a theatre festival, poetry festival, music, or any artistic form, is commendable. It gives a platform to all young students to exhibit their creativity. And our college students have really benefited a lot when they were present in our college and they were able to interact with all of them. And post-pandemic, I think this is a wonderful opportunity where our students will be interacting with with all people from Singapore and all other, which we would not have thought about it in the earlier one. So really, this is also a good platform for our students to talk to various. In fact, during this pandemic, what we have found out is that students, they are able to give that is the creativity skill of the students is enhanced, because it is, we do not see them, but even those who are not able to give out their talents, we are able to see students coming out and showing all. And as Hema has also rightly pointed out, that some of these students have finished their classes in poem, online courses in poem also. And this is a wonderful platform also. And I'm just, when Hema said that I have to give some, I just was going through the website, and one of the extract from the poem Hope by Prudence E.R. Curtis came to my mind. Hope shines forever, pure and bright. It never fades away. It is a ray of heavenly light, unyielding to decay. During this pandemic, we have seen many doctors, police officers, and many other well-wishers, NGOs, using poem to create awareness campaign, so that people become aware of the necessity to follow all standard protocols during this COVID pandemic. And really, this is a wonderful opportunity. I thank Prakriti Foundation for giving our college this opportunity to coordinate with you, and special thanks to Alvin PANG, who is also here from Singapore. And once we hear talking your take, and I think we will be able to collaborate with you to offer many courses in poems and etc. And I would also like to end by saying that the theatre club in our college is a remarkable one, and our students are able to exhibit their talents in the theatre club. And hopefully, whatever sir is going to talk to us, professors, and all the discussions which is going to happen today is really going to help us in moving our students to the next level also. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Gita. Hema, I believe you also would like to say a few words. Hema is an assistant professor in the college. Hema, could you please turn on audio and video, please?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. I'm really happy and really privileged to give such wonderful opportunity to the students. As ma'am has already mentioned, they are first generation learners. And being a faculty in English, I come across many students trying to write poems, trying to finding to, locate their publishing their work in the internet or, offline in the text. And it is going to be really beneficial for them. And I personally thank Prakriti for conducting such programs. It has been a wonderful thing. We've been associated with Prakriti for quite long years, as long as 8 years or 9 years. Since that time, they've been every year. Our college has seen many poets, many wonderful writers. It has more than 20 countries, people, poets from more than 20 countries had so far visited our college. And that has been a great opportunity for our students. And in one of the forums, few poems, a small booklet of a poem written by few of our students were published by one of the senior most poets in India. So that's a very big opportunity which happened in our own place. Okay, so it is like the students from our college need not go and seek opportunity outside. So that privilege was given by Prakriti. I'm really grateful and thankful for them, and we would like to have association with them forever. And as our principal ma'am said, we are very glad to have you as part of our program, to be associated with Dr. Pang, and we welcome you to our college. And maybe when things are back to normalcy, we would also like to invite you to visit our college when you come to India. Thank you, Prakriti. Thank you, Meera, Harish, and Peter for your wonderful opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Hema. Alvin's biography is in the chat, but I will read it out to you for those of you who may have visual disabilities. Alvin Pang, PhD, is a poet, writer, and editor whose broad creative practice spans 2 decades of literary activity in Singapore and elsewhere. He's been featured in the Oxford Companion to Modern Poetry in English and the Penguin Book of the Prose Poem. His writing has been translated into more than 20 languages, including Swedish, Croatian, and Macedonian. His titles include When the Barbarians Arrive, What Happened, Poems, 1997 to 2017, and Uninterrupted Time, from the recent work press. In 2021, he was appointed to the honorary position of Adjunct Professor of RMIT University. It is our pleasure to welcome to the microphone, so to speak, or to center screen, Alvin. I'm not going to use your academic title. We're poets, we're friends. Welcome to the mic, Alvin.
Thank you very much, Peter and Hima and Gita and everyone, and the Prakriti Foundation for giving me this opportunity. It's wonderful to be back with you. I remember my time at the Prakriti Festival in Chennai some years ago very, very fondly. I met some lifelong friends there. And of course, even though we are in the middle of this terrible pandemic that has been, keeping the world apart, I think it's wonderful that we have the technology and the means, and also the desire, the will to connect, digitally and to spend time together. So thank you. Thank you for spending time with me and for your attention. I'm going to start with something that might be a little close to home for you. And I beg your pardon if I step on any toes, but I have to read this poem, given that my dear friend who inspired it is in the audience tonight. This is a poem I wrote after reading Priya Sarukai Chapriya's fabulous translations of the 8th century Tamil mystic poet Andal. And it's titled Andal, Feeding the Pigeons. Don't be parrots bound by thread to the voice of the master. Be the master, the lilt in his step, the stove of his loins, the ember fleeing into the crisp dawn air as the beloved approaches. Enter through his eyes and finish his perfection with longing. Take this grain and tell the faithless one, I am coming. I will pen him with my body. When my body is spent, I will pour breath into his lips. When I run out of breath, these words will nourish him. When words crack, he can feast on their hunger. This is how we mortals tame our gods. I thought I would take you from India back home with me to Singapore for a little bit for the period of my reading tonight, brief as it is. We can't travel, but perhaps you can get a little bit of a taste of what life has been like for us over the past year. As you probably know, Singapore is an island city-state. We're very, very small, very, very dense. And normally we're very well connected with the world. We depend absolutely on trade for everything, water, food, making a living. So to be cut off from the world in this profound way is painful. And even while, in some ways we are relatively okay, we're trying to keep things under control, I think there has been a lot of a psychological strain. The mental well-being of my people have definitely suffered in the past year because of being, in a sense, trapped at home. So I'm going to read mainly poems that have been written in this pandemic. Many of them were written in collaboration with a dear friend of mine, the UK poet George Surtees. We've been writing letters to each other, you see, as poets. And of course, being poets, when we write letters to each other, they really are poems. We've been trading poems back and forth. And it's a way to both keep in touch and to keep ourselves sane. So I'll be sharing some of these with you tonight, and they're all new unpublished poems. I'll start with one that will give you a taste of Singapore. Now, some of you might know in Singapore, we very often use this sort of street vernacular, which we call Singlish, Singaporean English, colloquial English, which is made up of a lot of the different languages, the different textures that compose our society. So you have a bit of Malay in there, a bit of the Indian tongues in there, a bit of the range of Chinese tongues in there, all mixed up with and spicing English, which is the language we all speak or have spoken since independence, inherited from our colonial background, of course. Now, the thing about the colonial history, which of course India also shares, that British colonial history, is that you would think they wouldn't forget that they were once our colonial sort of, masters, but it seems that they do. A few years back, a British TV program came to film on location in Singapore. I think it was called Cold Feet. And so they were filming in Singapore as a modern program. But when they went back home, when the production team went back home to Manchester, they found that they had to Photoshop to edit the footage, to add in signs, add in, sort of red lights and Chinese lettering to make Singapore look more Asian, because apparently we look too English to them. And it wasn't convincing that this was an exotic, faraway location. Well, of course, there's a very good reason why we look like Manchester. And the reason was them. But there was a beautiful irony in that situation, an irony, but also a bit of rage, right? And that's what this poem comes from, Singapore. So we had to make it look a bit more like Singapore, given it was Singapore. Hey, not spotting lah. Make people go extra draw snake at leg mile to make the place look more like its own self. You see lah, all those years of speak good English until now people cannot tell this from Manchester. Got tall building, got people, mountain people, sea shopping center crowd, got rain, got grumpy taxi driver, got rush hour traffic, got Scottish bridge, even got big grey building with fake Greek columns just like theirs. Always like that. Die must supple all their Angus Ross until they give up and cancel. Cannot just be humble, know your place, pretend not to understand, smile. Dog mouth cannot grow elephant teeth, understand. Asian road signs must be Asian. Asian buildings must be Asian. Asians must look Asian. Cannot be too clean or white or macam London banker. If not, wait, next time people confuse trouble elsewhere, how? Tax incentives wasted. Tourism board angry. Then finish. This kind of chapalang, not 3, not 4 island, who wants to come? Being small and an island, we fall in love with the edge of things, all around, being brink, the sea, a kind of nervous frontier, checking our gains like expired visas, asking after our grandparents that came from, waiting to pounce. But nobody's tongues are clean, no ears free of windborne whispers. Quarantine in a gilded oven, the rust will sell you out. There's such salt. So better squat between storm and storm. Watch where horizon has always been, fence to sit on or pay past, weighing each tide's toll, chance the breaking down as breaking through. We refugees making for tomorrow's shore. The waters behind us are the waters before us. Can we say island without meaning brokenness? Can a slice be whole? Water under the bridge? Our own. Poems are islands, clung to by those cast off the lurching ship of language, he lamented. We've gone overboard with that metaphor, she quipped, spearing a grouper for breakfast. Archipelagos in an unmapped sea of grass, scattered honeybees. Between wind and wind, voice, from blue to blue, clarity, with tide and time, direction. Prey cunning, bad teeth, peril wit, what the lone tree tells the looming flame. Exposure as depth, the turn inward, a downward burrowing, rooting what arrived afloat, entangled in grammar, in prose, mountain the enclave, so what is outside becomes debris, redundant, flotsam and jetsam to an intact main, islanding everything else to horizontals. The one who draws the map defines the center. At last, we are out of options but to stay in and count our regrets. That old fraud time is in custody. We are cuffed to him for safety. The shadows of books frown from girdled shelves. Too hot today to answer grief. Friend finds his dad among the thousands dead named in the New York Times. Here is a hard word to stay in love with. It chafes like a tight boot heel after the 10th drill. Friend sends me sunset pictures framed by sheer white walls. Friend sends me music from an age of the cavernous. The rain is no friend, but an essential service doing its own rounds, ungainsayable, a reason to shun the red call of the outside, for those who must wait for the going to come back. Exactly this sense of stagger, of days blown past, of taking refuge in the unobserved leaving of a sea eagle, sated, clutching catch, fish carcass blooming on scum-flecked hidden cove sands, shrine-decked with Marys, Vishnus, Tropics, peacock-mounted Muruggans, sea view as worship, tide as trance, wave-led, even song cast to the wind like nets calling fry home, small, moated, isle, shelters beachcombing, ink specks, the nothing of it, rich as new vellum, all over which the black days crawl until the rising and time recovers. Lovers without hands. Let's stand in front of mirrors and rehearse touch, a time of droop we did not know to conserve. Now your sheen's dry heat scours the sweep, dawn's pour. There is no need to hide from dead roses. Their thorns don't reach as deep as scarlet, the dip of pen into blotch. Now we have a love that does not scar, your skin parchment only to forgetting, and already damp with time, you are tearing like the arc of a wave seen from a star, incurious to origins. When you come to my shore, will you put on your nakedness, or will you, shy of rue, guise in wanting? Distance becomes horizon, the glass between us misty with breath. Our story becomes landscape to the life we give way to. We are traveled, arrived at, unplumbed lagoons reliving the sweet blue else. I ask nothing. Wait with me. And the last one till I pause. Is night kinder for waiting? Is the question asked of this unquiet. Night as break, as pause, as reset, quelled restiveness. But we've had enough. Night is a mob of shadows gathered to protest, daily profiling. All nights look the same to a blind policeman, black beneath day's tattoos. Something to pass through without fanfare on the way to real business. Night as diurnal self, these unmapped, unmined hours not put to work yet. Lazy native time, dissembling illiterate, impenitent night. Night as a virus keeping us from shops and school and constant increase. Do all nights matter? Some are just trouble like this. Some are crucibles of an unspent heat. Some exhaust themselves to light a white surrender. Thank you. I'll just stop there for now.
So on behalf of our audience who can't be heard, thank you. Thank you for that set of readings. So Alvin, I'm going to start by just going a little back into your journey with poetry. What are your first memories of poetry as such? When did you first recognize this creature, this animal, this form, this thing called poetry?
Yeah. So I think it is very much a part of my background and upbringing, much more than fiction and stories or novels as we know them today. You know, poetry to me, the music of it first came through nursery rhymes in the different languages. It's one of those things that cut across language, right? Different languages, the sort of folk songs and tunes that we chant to children. There is a music to that. There's assonance and rhythm and rhyme and meter and all those things, regardless of language. And of course, the rhythm and the music are different, but the idea that there is a certain lilt and a certain music comes through in the words. And certainly that was true of the different kinds of rhymes and verse that I encountered as a child. Of course, I didn't have a name for it. I didn't call it poetry, right? It was just the music of my childhood. But when I remember when I was in school, and this was in secondary school, so I was like 12, 13, and I had my very first literature lesson. And this is one of those stories where you can say, kids, teachers are important, they will change your life. So my literature teacher, for our very first lesson, asked my class, and myself included, to compare two poems about the sea, right? To just, without explaining anything about what poetry was, just to read these two pieces of writing and just talk about in what ways they're the same and in what ways they were different. So one poem was Alfred Lord Tennyson's Break, Break, Break. Break, break, break on thy cold gray stones, O sea, which he had written to his friend who had passed away. And it was a very emo poem, as people might say today. And it features the cold gray English Channel. It's stormy and turbulent, reflecting his grief. And so that was one poem. The other poem was this anonymous poem about life in the tropics by the sea, right? And it was in one of those textbooks that they give out to the Commonwealth schools. The author is not stated. It was clearly written as a school text, and it was all about. It was simple rhymes, which is fine, but it was all about how life by the sea was sitting under coconut trees and catching fish and maybe planting rice and basically being sort of indolent and lazy and being on vacation all the time. Now, needless to say, as a Singaporean boy of the 1970s, neither vision of the sea resembled my own. So that's the first point. It's like, hang on, where's my sea? The sea I understand. And second was that in listening to the music of these two poems, I'm like, oh, like that. You call that poetry? I can do that. I could do that. I could do that in an afternoon. So that very afternoon, I went home, borrowed my parents' typewriter, and banged out my own version of the sea as I saw it, and putting in the music, that I sort of had in me from childhood. And that's how I started. And I think in some ways that proto poem is not a very good poem, but it does speak to the ways in which poetry has come to be. The music of it, but also the purpose of it. The idea that it can pry open things that have not been noticed, realized, paid attention to, that I care about. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true of so many of us who learn poetry, English poetry, in lands other than England, the former colonies, part of empire, etc. I mean, I remember the thing of people, praising summer, and the thing there of like the brightness, and shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And summer's day just make me feel very, very hot and uncomfortable. I much prefer the monsoon.
Yeah. It took me so long to figure out what a daffodil was. It's like, what's a daffodil?
Absolutely.
We don't have daffodils, right? Yeah.
I've looked up what a daffodil looks like, but I don't think I've ever seen one. And this entire thing, that dissonance between what you read and what is, that very British view of rain as being gloomy and dark, and here life-giving. It comes in I'm sorry, I'm speaking from an Indian point of view. It's after summer, and you have these months of heavy rain that just bring the landscape to life. Rain is a joyous thing for us here in the subcontinent.
No, as a fellow monsoon climate person, right? Let's put it that way. I mean, it's power. It's bigger than us. It brings life. It brings trade. it changes the world, right? When it rains. I mean, when I went to England for the first time, I remember thinking, why is their rain so puny? It's like, that's not real rain. That's like a drizzle back home. So which is fine because that difference can also provoke curiosity and wonder as difference should. I think part of the problem is it's so imbalanced. You have the daffodils, but not the mogra, right? You don't have all the different points of view. So it's very one-sided, and I think it is a driving force, certainly for me. There's so much.
Go from there into your okay. So this was your first experiences with poetry, finding that, hey, you found a lack of representation, and you went ahead and decided to represent, and you banged out that poem on a typewriter. And I hope you've kept that poem.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've got a couple of poems that I wrote in school for much the same kind of reason. I was like, I can do rhymes, and my dad's little portable typewriter, and counted the syllables out and made sure, etc. So I wanted to go from there into growing up. Then, who were the poets that first came into your mind? That entered your head as poets. That these were names of people who wrote poetry. And from there, if you could segue into your influences on you as a poet, as a young man, as a young person coming into poetry, who were the poets who made you want to be a poet? Take us from there into the time, perhaps, that you could stand up and say, I am a poet.
Oh, well, I think I've come in a circle, right? So I talked about how my earliest influences, in a sense, were the sort of children's rhymes and nursery rhymes and folk rhymes and verses and the languages, the sounds, the soundscapes of my childhood. I've come round to that, right? And I've passed through variously the sort of people I read in school and were told were poets, your Tennysons, your Eliots, your Wordsworth and Blakes and Shakespeare, of course. And along the way, I think I did pick up an affinity for the Irish poet Seamus Heaney, the late Irish poet Seamus Heaney, Nobel Prize winner. And the reason for that, I had good teachers, but the reason for that also was he too, or in his work, I saw a sort of tension, if not struggle, but also struggle between the sort of very urbane, educated British voice, the sort of intellect that went to university and studied the Eliots and the Shakespeares and the Wordsworths. But also he comes from a very rural Irish background, so that vernacular voice. He celebrated those voices that, that were in the way, the sort of voices that first informed my ear, right? So the sort of languages of my childhood. And what I learned from Heaney was that not only could you be a poet and have both, carry both, the grand English tradition, but also the sort of tradition and heritage of your background, but in a sense, you had to pay due respect to both. That you had a responsibility to find the common ground, the music, the sort of wellspring that powers both, in a sense. And that was tremendous. I would say that was the moment when I felt that being a poet was not at odds with being Singaporean, being non-white, being from the colonies, as it were. Because right up until then, everything in my upbringing and education said one thing, that you are learning to be a good consumer, a good reader, a good critic, a good student, but not a maker of art, not a teller of stories, a listener only, a buyer, right? So Heaney, in a sense, pointed me in that direction. And that I owe a great debt to. The other major influence was the pop music and indie rock music of the time. I was listening to bands like The Smiths and U2 and Depeche Mode and so on and so forth. And the thing is, they were writing songs that weren't just about, the sort of shallow love affair, romance type things that pop music tends to be. They were writing about social issues. They were writing about the Irish conflict. They were writing about war. They were writing about social injustice in music that kids were listening to. And I thought that was very powerful. They were basically writing essays in song form. And of course, the song form is very, very close to poetry, you know, they're kin. And I literally remember writing song lyrics that were essentially poems. So that's another influence. And later on, I you know, the more I looked into it, and my recent PhD research has brought me back really to this idea of those original strands of music, right? The folk verse, the so-called small culture or low culture. They're as important, and the distinction between high and low is itself a very loaded distinction. And I think it's worthwhile. I would say I consider myself a poet because I try to listen to all aspects of my background as much as possible. Yeah.
Could we go perhaps a little bit further into your background, into being Singaporean? You live at a confluence of Singapore was the city that came into prominence because of its geographical position at a very crucial trading center, very important to the British as part of their plans for, you know, their dreams of empire, etc. It is a confluence of cultures, of the Malay, the Chinese, a lot of Indian ancestry, Indian origin people there as well. And as it became a very important world trading center, not just for the British, you have people from all over the world who call Singapore home now. What is it about growing up there? And the culture of Singapore per se, that we say in India and other parts of the world who are logging into this conversation right now, what was it like? And perhaps could you take on, if you feel like it, any of the misconceptions you often hear and what you would like people to know about arts and culture in Singapore?
Well, so many, basically don't believe the movie Crazy Rich Asians. We're not, it's very misleading. That's sort of whitewashing Singapore in many ways that we've sort of pushed back against. We are you know, we are a lot more diverse. We are not a Chinese city, for goodness sakes. That perhaps is the most bizarrely common misconception that people around the world have, that we're a city in China, or that, you know, we're essentially a sort of Hong Kong but with warmer weather kind of thing. No, we are not, very not. I think what for me has been most special about growing up and living in Singapore is precisely the fact that we are diverse. That we take for granted the fact that there are many truths, many gods, many ways of doing things, many languages, you know, and because every day I grow up with that, right? It's so much a part of my childhood and landscape, right? From the call to prayer to you know, the sort of the Hindu temples next to the Chinese temples, where the devotees would pay respects. Devotees to one would pay respects to the other because they were literally situated next to each other, and it was only the right, respectful, neighborly thing to do. You know, I grew up with that sort of sensibility, which is very rare, I think, in many parts of the world. But I take that for granted, and I take that in a sense as part of my birthright, that this sort of broad landscape, this tapestry, is the world. And we don't have to, in a sense, pick sides, which increasingly, of course, the world is asking us to do, to pick sides of one kind or another, right? This not picking sides, this having this profound sense of variety and choice. You can see that in the food and the cuisine, very important part of our way of life. But ironically, we are also sort of known as a very rule-bound, form-based, strict, choiceless society. I think that is another misconception. In some ways, yes, you have a very paternalistic, perhaps conservative parents in charge, as it were. But on the other hand, I would say we are interested in different choices very often, and there is a tremendous opportunity for learning and growth and travel and things like that. So the world is quite open to us. But there are, of course, old habits of wanting to stay in one's box or one's community or one's area of comfort. They persist. And I don't think we're unique. We're unique in that sense. Art scene. Did you know that poetry is incredibly popular in Singapore? So to give you an example, right? One of my books, and it's not because I'm great or anything, but just to give you a sense of what is typical in Singapore. One of my little chapbooks, What Gives Us Our Names, has sold more than 12,000 copies just in Singapore alone. Poetry, right? You don't see that. You don't see that in London. I can tell you that. And so most people, and you know, it's not uncommon for a brand new, like a first book of a good poet, to move 500,000 copies or even more. Now, I'm not saying book sales are the only way to determine the quality of a poet, but it just tells you we have a readership, we care, people are writing, it's thriving. There's an online Facebook group that we run every year, and we've been running it since 2014, called SingPoRimo, Singapore Poetry Writing Month. And I'm gonna put that. And the thing about this group is, when we started, we have like 5 people writing 1 poem a day in the month of April, giving each other's prompts and encouragement and so on. Just free for all, right? Just write together, have a community and write together. We started with 5, forgot to turn the privacy setting to private, so it was left public. And before we knew it, 5 became 12, 12 became 40, 40 became 100. Today we've got over 6,000 people coming together every April to write a poem a day, mostly young people. But you know, and again, it's not about the numbers. It's the fact that you see people come together and want to connect, and want to engage and want to write and to embrace this thing that they have found, that they have not been told to study, something they want to do for themselves. And I think that's something special in that. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And what about community in the non-virtual sense? Do you have a lot of events, community readings? I mean, our perception of Singapore from far away is of a very busy commercial kind of place, where there would not be perhaps much time for people to spare to say drop in on a reading or hang out together as poets and do a slam or whatever it is. Do you have a lot of that happening?
Yeah. It's very lively. At one point we had to slow down because I remember running a few readings a month in the late 90s, early 2000s. It got actually too hectic because we were like, once a month, one reading a month, and then you had a competing venue do one a month. And before we knew it, each of us was running 2 or 3 readings a month, and we were very quickly running out of time and people and so on. Today, I think a lot of activity happens online. It's actually fairly lively. There was a very popular slam reading and open mic reading going on. It's I think every week, at least every week, there's something going on. Of course, all that has stopped because of COVID. Some of it has moved online. Poetry, again, in particular, has been a wonderful form for that. Partly because I think it allows busy young people to put something together fairly quickly in a relatively short time. It's compact, and so you can do a lot and share a lot in a very short period of time. I just want to share something with you, if I may, just to give you an indication of the energy. If I may be allowed to share my screen a little bit, you think that's all right? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So this was a reading we did in maybe a year or two ago, and basically this was a some members of the Singapore Poetry Writing Month community. Now, as part of one of the activities, they had challenged people to write one poem for every subway station, every underground station on our MRT system in the network. So they actually pulled it together. Someone even put together a digital map so you could go to the station on the map and see what had been written about it. And then they went out and basically did a flash mob. None of this was organized. They just decided to show up and read those poems at each of the stations. So they went around the entire network and read their poems. As you can see, all walks of life. And they even, they've done crazy things like combined wrestling with poetry slams, just to make things up a bit. And I think one very important thing they have done in recent years, I'll stop the sharing now. One of the things that we have done in recent years is to engage with, there is a very active group of migrant workers mainly from South Asia, but also from Southeast Asia, China, and so on, who have been spending their one free day a week meeting to write poems and perform their poems. So a few years ago, I helped them put together a competition at their request. And today they are a thriving community of writers. They're migrant workers. They work in all kinds of trades, from construction to services to engineering to anything you can think of. And they've been, I think, added to the fold. And we have interactions and workshops and sort of collaborations with each other, where the Singaporean poets and these poets from elsewhere have been working together to write. So I think one of the surprising and exciting things about poetry in Singapore is that it's growing, not just in the kinds of poems being written, but also who's writing them and who we're sort of working with and involving. Who counts as a Singaporean poet is also very much growing. Yeah.
Okay. Just a reminder to folks in the audience, we would be very happy to take your questions if you would put them in the Q&A box. I have a comment there, but I will carry on and I'm going to give you some time. Sorry, there is a question here from Pauline Christina, who asked, what is the first thought that comes to your mind if you think about writing a poem relating India and Singapore?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is there's a lot of potential. There are a lot of things we can write about. The other thing that comes to mind is guilt, because I owe a dear friend, Anupama Raju from Trivandrum, who in fact invited me to write exactly a poem like that. And she had started first and has been waiting for a response from me for the past 2 years. I just feel bad. It's not that I don't want to do it, but the pandemic has made it quite difficult, I think, for me to, for example, travel to India again and sort of revive that sense of kinship even, and a relation, right? This sense of being there and having a part of myself resonate, right? In this straight, uncannily familiar way. So I would very much like to erase my guilt by finally writing that poem. So she has, spent her childhood in Singapore. She writes about that. I have visited her in Kerala. I'm supposed to write about that and about the connections in between. I just haven't gotten around to it. So that's the first thought that comes to mind. But there's so many ties, right? Of course, Chennai has been a major sort of shipping off point for people, for trade between Southeast Asia and the subcontinent for centuries, long before the British, right? We've been connected for so long, but I think a lot of that has been forgotten. because the sort of British story, the colonial story, has sort of dominated everything else. I would like more work harking back to some of those older oceanic stories and see if interesting new ideas come from that. I'm not interested in recovering the past, but I am interested in seeing how what has happened before gives us permission to think about what might be possible tomorrow.
Yeah, we in India do often forget, in the middle of our own colonial history and our own past and the way we like to see ourselves, we do forget that there were kingdoms in southern India which expanded their reach over Southeast Asia and have left their culture way before they were migrants in the British, within the British Empire. There was cultural exchange and trade and commerce going back so long before that, and we sometimes forget that we have these older ties as well.
I mean, literally, the name Singapura is Sanskrit, right? So that alone is a profound reminder of that heritage and that connection.
Arthi doesn't have a question, but she says that it was an informative and enlightening experience of listening to Alvin's work, as well as getting to know a bit about the poetry scene in Singapore. It was wonderful. Kavina from the college that was with us today, SDNB, says, as a poet, which comes first to you, empathizing with your reader or just putting in your raw emotions?
That's a very good question from must be a poet. This person asking it must be a poet. More and more, I think it's the two are not at odds. What you're trying to capture is when your own longing, your own deepest longings intersect or meet the world's deepest needs. When your own greatest longings meet the world's deepest needs, you're trying to find exactly those emotions or a way of thinking about your emotions that meets empathy with your reader, that is something that is deeply and profoundly human, that goes beyond just yourself, right? But at the same time, in order to understand that, you've really got to look deeper at your own emotions. Just because we have emotions, just because we have histories, just because we have backgrounds and stories and memories, doesn't mean we understand them very well, right? It just means we have the opportunity to understand them better first. But we still have to put in the work to really think about those emotions and histories and memories and so on, and sort of figure out what they're really about, where they come from, where they're going, to turn the raw into something that's maybe not so raw. And when we do that, we realize that we're offering up something that is nourishing to ourselves, but also nourishing to our readers. And I think that's really the only place true nourishment comes from. Which is also why I think if you only work at the level of raw emotions, it's uncooked food. It's possible, but it's just not going to be in some ways as nourishing. You have to go deeper. And when you go deep enough, it will start to connect with what readers need and relate to as well. I hope that answers the question.
So many poets, when aspiring young poets, when they start out writing poetry, they hear the first part of that Wordsworth quote, which I put in chat. Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, and they stop there. A lot of people just say, okay, we will pour these feelings onto the page or whatever it is. But there's more to that quote. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility, which takes me to what the other part of what I wanted to talk about with you, which is your own particular craft. How does Alvin Pang approach a poem? How do you do it at one shot? Is it something that you would put that spontaneous overflow down on a page and work on it in tranquility later? How late is that? What is your method? What is your poetic practice like?
So it has varied over time, and it also, I suppose, varies depending on the subject and depending on the poem as well. So there are poems that speak from a grappling with form, right? Like I'm not a form-based poet, or at least not in the sense of form that is inherited. I like to make up forms and structures for myself, but I don't like to use things that have been handed down to me. They feel like wearing a dead person's clothes. You may fit, you may look good in it, but it's always going to be, for me, a little bit weird. So I prefer, in a sense, to tailor-make my form to fit my own functions and purposes. But then I have to think about what those functions and purposes are. You could say that for me, a successful poem, a poem where I surprise myself, and when I tell myself something I didn't know when I started out, is a successful one. So the poem, the process of working through the poem, trying to find the right words in the right order, on the page at the right time, is a thinking process. You're walking yourself through something you don't really know the answer for. You're exploring, and in the process of exploration, you're discovering new ways in which ideas and images connect to each other. Now, that to me is the spontaneous overflow of human powerful feelings. It's a spontaneous walk through a part of my head or a question that I don't fully understand, but which bugs me, right? The powerful feeling here is this compulsion to really want to answer this question, or to really say something about a particular subject. The walking through is the process of writing. The recollection in tranquility is where I really sit down and think about what I've done. And very often it's about asking myself, am I being honest, right? Am I actually not going as far as I could, because I don't dare somehow to go to a certain place, to realize something about myself, or to come upon an answer I don't actually want to hear, right? Because you can't fool yourself, and you can't stop short of admitting to the fact that you've been stupid, foolish, cruel, unkind, lustful, whatever. All those things that we try to purge from ourselves are also things that are profoundly human. And sometimes they are where those spontaneous feelings come from. To me, the process of writing a poem is a process of paring away all the things that tell us we are not what we really are. That really, I think it's an investigation. I think it's a peeling back. I think it's about arriving at a point where you realize something about yourself that you didn't before. And if you do it right, a reader is brought to this new awareness as well. So you teach yourself first, and hopefully a reader picks it up and is taught, or at the very least, is prompted to take their own walk, right? So to me, I'm more and more attracted to poems where they don't end with comfortable answers, but they end with questions that make you want to pick up a pen and write or think. And those are the poems that interest me these days. Those are the poems I kind of want to write. I hope that makes a lot of sense. I hope that makes sense. Should I read a poem to end?
Yes. I have so many other questions I would like to ask you, but we do have to be mindful of our time. I will just take one more from Priya Sarupechabria, who asks, is form invoked by content, as it were?
Okay. So I'm going to take that question and I'm going to relate that to another question I see in Q&A, which is, what does the poet choose to write about, the reality of the world or the imagination of itself? And I'm going to answer both because I think they're pretty much the same thing. I like to insist that the poet's, the imagination is part of the world. is part of the fact of the world. And, you know, in the corporate world, you call it design, right? So many things we see in the world began as an idea, began as a dream, began as an imagined thing. So many behaviors in the world stem from what we imagine ourselves to be or to want, right? So many of the concepts we consider important, you know, justice and love and so on, they are imagined, but that doesn't mean they are not real. They are profoundly real. They're just material in a very different way. They are very, very real, and they make a difference in the world. Let's, you know, just look around us. So many of the challenges that beset us are about whose imagination gets to be reality, right? Whose imagination, whose dream, whose idea, whose beliefs count, right? Who is considered news and who is considered fake news? All those are imagined, but they're also part of the fabric. So in that sense, when you write a poem, I think form becomes part of the content because you're always grappling with the way in which the world comes from imagination, but in a sense has to also be imagined. To try and know the world is to imagine it in a particular way as well. So you're always sort of toggling back and forth between what you think the world is and what you think it was or ought to be. And a poem, in grappling with that, through imagination, through language, itself becomes a thing. This is why you can pick up a book, right? What is a book? It's a physical object filled, you know, with words made flesh, filled with imagination given life and form in ways that will outlive us. I mean, in some ways, books and poems are more real than us because they last longer and than our mortal flesh in some ways, right? So I think I think form and content in a way are two sides of the same coin. A good poem is always content grappling with form, and form trying to sort of emerge from and to try and master content. But it's a negotiation. It's a boat on the sea. The boat never quite conquers the sea, but learns to move through it.
And I have to, unfortunately, negotiate time right now, and I have to say that we will have to wind up. I'm going to ask Alvin to conclude this reading this evening with a poem. Before that, let me just quickly thank everyone. Thank you everyone in the audience who came in today, who made time for this evening with poetry. Thank you to the SDNB Vaishnav College for associating with Poetry with Prakriti and with Prakriti Foundation for this event today. Thank you for bringing in your students with us to be with us. Thank you for your questions, those of you who asked them. Thank you, friends in the audience who have come in because it's not because you're from the college, but because it's Prakriti or because it's Alvin. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to Prakriti Foundation for this festival, this beautiful festival that's been running since October, that has enriched my life so much with the poetry that I've been hearing and the poets I've been meeting. Thank you for all that. And now, as we should, let us conclude with a poem. Alvin?
And before I read my last poem, I'd like to thank you again, Peter, for a very engaging conversation and for kindly hosting this session. Thank you, Peter. And thank you, everyone, for listening. So this last poem is for my daughter, after I am gone. Being the cranky, morbid poet that I am, I very often imagine what will happen after I'm no longer on this earth. And that is yet another example of an imagined thing that will very much, without any doubt whatsoever, become a reality. So for my daughter, after I am gone, may there be fewer days when you reach for my absent hand as for a banister in a house of sway. And may the years we have made echo like worn bells or the distant throats of cranes you cannot name. And may your heart, broken by that first love lost, his golden fur still nuzzling your dreams, lead you to new thunder. And may what is undone become so much wet grass. The long drives we took through those neighborhoods of unspent time, snacking on distraction, may they have taught you more than silence, and may all the words I left unsaid be yours to forget, and may there be little to forgive. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. And good night.
Have a good night, and we'll see you
Thank
next
you,
week.
Alvin. Yeah.
We'll see you next Saturday.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hema. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Peter. Good night.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pang. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Meera and Prakriti, and of course, Harish. And thanks to all my students who had participated in this. Thanks all. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.